visiting with a good and great friend and cohort from CrescentCitySports.com. Among his many exploits, our good and great friend Les East joining us now. Always a pleasure, Les. Welcome to the show, and I hope you're well in these strange times.
Thanks, Ken. I am well. Good to be with you again. Hope all is well with you, and I understand it's all well with Rudy from speaking to him before we went on the air. So let's knock on wood.
Rudy's Rudy, man. That's never going to change. It's all good there. So we're fine, and it's great to have you with us tonight. And so much we can talk about. I want to start, though, but, of course, the latest news. Now, we saw a report on Friday. It was dismissed as being inaccurate and premature. But as it turns out today, there's some partial truth to it because the Southwestern Athletic Conference has postponed all fall sports perhaps until the spring. Now, that doesn't mean cancel. And, again, you have to get the terminology right. Postpone is not cancel, but postpone is true. Less, that's disappointing, obviously, but where it leads us with regard to the Bayou Classic obviously remains to be seen. Can't possibly speculate on that at this point in time.
No, the location of the game was already in doubt because of the release of information a few weeks back that there was a possibility, varying degrees of possibility depending on who you talk to, as to whether it would be played in New Orleans in November or elsewhere, but in Louisiana. But now everything's up in the air with this latest decision, and this is unfortunate, and yet, there are a lot of unfortunate things that have to take place in the name of prudence. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of FCS schools and conferences really being hit hard by the pandemic and their ability to function normally. I think they're probably going to be the first ones to really feel the brunt of it. The SEC and the bigger conferences can wait a little longer, and they can withstand this to some degree. But just financially, with the FBS programs canceling their non-conference games, a lot of which are against FCS, I think is starting a trickle-down effect that's going to impact the smaller schools, unfortunately.
And this was not totally unexpected. I think the issue now becomes, can they even play the Bayou Classic in the Dome in the spring? Real question about that, because once the Saints season is over with, they break it down. They break down the seating and the way it's structured, not totally, but partially, but more than that, they pull up the turf less. And so would they be able to get all that accomplished to be able to play one football game, or will it move on? I would guess the latter is a real possibility.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely they would be able to play in the Dome. The renovations that are taking place with the building are behind schedule already because of the circumstances. And so I think everything that would have to go into making the building accessible for one football game in the spring, I think it's unlikely that they will be able to pull that off. Hopefully the game can be played somewhere. Hopefully it will be played in Louisiana. But I think it's pretty unlikely at this point that it would be played in the Superdome.
Agreed. Turning our attention to the NBA and the Pelicans, I would have to say that this is outstanding news. We're looking for any more right in the middle of the dirt pile we see every day with regard to numbers on this virus. But the NBA and the Players Association today put out that there were 0 positives of 346 coronavirus tests of the players at the Bubble campus in Orlando since July 13th. Now that is an indication, at least to this point, that this is working in a big way, Les.
Yeah, it's great news, and I believe there was some similar good news coming out of the NHL. They had a lot of tests done, and they did have a few positive cases, but very few. So we're not seeing a spike so far, which was the biggest fear, was that they were not going to be able to contain this initially and that it would get out of hand and they might have to alter their plans to resume these seasons. So far, it's gone about as well as I think anyone could have hoped up to this point. We'll see how it goes. Everything nowadays is day to day and week to week, but the news so far is encouraging, and that just has so many ramifications if they're able to pull this off, not only for resuming the NBA season, but it would lift so many people's spirits to see something like that succeed. And it might be an indication that other areas of society can be a little bolder in trying to reopen because they see success. So any glimmer of light that we can see at this point is welcomed, and that's certainly a pretty bright one at this point.
Les East, CrescentCitySports.com with us. You mentioned the NHL. Of course, Major League Baseball starts in a couple of days. My Cardinals will be good again. Your Reds are going to be good finally, and that's good news. Now, that's a totally different dynamic because these teams are all playing in their home facilities with the exception of the Toronto Blue Jays. So no real bubble to speak of. I think more than any other sport, I think Major League Baseball is really going to set the table as to whether or not we can have fall sports. If they pull it off, regardless of the fact that there are no fans in the stands, and you don't see any real outbreak, I mean, if you're going to see a couple of things, that's got to happen, right? But if you don't see anything significant, to me, I think Major League Baseball is probably the one to point to say that's going to be the one that sets the table for everything else.
Yeah, it's different from the NBA because it is, as you mentioned, it's not in a bubble. They're going to be scattered all over their home stadiums. There's going to be travel involved. One thing I was a little surprised at, although I don't know the logistics of this, but it would seem to me that it might have been worth considering playing all of your home and away games against divisional opponents at one time. In other words, instead of having 3-game series, if you're scheduled to play a divisional opponent 6 or 9 times, play them all consecutively so you limit the amount of travel. I know it's a burden on the team that's on the road, but it would work both ways. So I thought maybe that would be a way to limit the amount of travel involved in potential exposure. But another thing baseball does have going for it is that the game itself has more built-in social distancing than other sports. I mean, you have the batter and the home plate umpire and the catcher are very close to one another, and base runners and basemen. But a lot of people are spread out, and so there's less close contact than you have in some other sports by necessity.
It's a very good point, and of course we've watched, those of us that don't sleep at night, some idiots like me, have watched the Korean baseball organization now for the last month plus, and I've gotten to know these players. I'm pronouncing names and everything else and watching a bunch of pitchers that throw 88 miles an hour, but the fact of the matter is they've pulled that off with no issues whatsoever. It's worked perfectly, and they've done it with no fans. They considered letting fans in, but then they had a little bit more of an outbreak, I guess, about 2 weeks ago and decided, no, we're not going to do that. But the fact is they've played baseball. They've played it safely. They're getting their season in. So, yeah, I think what you said is accurate, and I think that they can probably do that here as long as guys don't get, for lack of a better description, stupid about how they live their lives.
Yeah, and that's true of every facet of society right now. Not just these sports leagues, but the responsibility that falls on each individual to do their part. And I think we've seen a lot of success stories, and we've certainly seen it in New Orleans and Louisiana early on. Not quite as much recently, but we have seen a lot of responsible behavior by a lot of people to start to get a handle on this thing, and ultimately that's going to be the case with these sports leagues as well. Everyone who is involved, even without spectators, you still have players and coaches and training staff and officials and other staff members. It's going to be incumbent on all those people to act responsibly, and I suspect virtually all of them will do so.
Yeah, I agree. I think they will. You got a knucklehead in every group, I suppose. But if they are responsible, I think it will work. I really do. And I think that's going to pave the way. Look, I know that the SEC is watching professional sports very closely, because if this can occur, then it's gonna justify their decisions to try to do something, whether it's the full schedule, whether it's eliminating non-conference games, which to me, I think I understand that, but I think that's a little bit problematic, and here's why. If you're Nichols and you're playing LSU, why would you eliminate that game? I mean, that's an hour drive, an hour and 15-minute drive. I mean, to me, that doesn't make any sense. It makes sense when USC and Alabama cancel with a cross-country trip to play, but my point is I don't think all non-conference games should disappear. Tulane Southeastern is another perfect example. Why would you cancel that? So I guess it really comes down to wait as long as you can, watch and see what happens on the professional level, which gives you until early August to say, all right, we've got a pretty good indication of what we think we can do. This is what we're going to try to do, either on time, eliminating non-conference games, or, just eliminating games altogether, moving to the spring, which we've seen in some instances here. The answer to the question, and I want to get your take on it. Look, I've said all along, there's no universal right or wrong here. It's simply all about making the best decision based upon the information that you have and the situation that you find yourself in. Let's face it, it's a lot different in one state than it might be in another. It's a lot different in one county or parish than it might be in another. So I think each one has to be taken into consideration before decisions are made. And by the way, John Bell Edwards gave us all the opportunity to pray and fast today, and I'm doing that. I'm buying it. I'm all for it. And the reason he's done that is because he wants to see things move forward, but he knows that it's not going to be easy. And he's hoping that prayer will help not only calm this virus, but to make the right decisions here, because everybody's caught up in right and wrong. And ultimately, what's right is making the best decision you can make based upon the plethora of information that you have. I mean, that's what's right, nothing else. Not about whether you're doing this or not doing this. To me, that's where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have to get as informed as they possibly can, be patient, and understand that they still have some time in a lot of these cases. Don't make a premature decision one way or another. Don't make an uninformed decision, and then consult as many experts as you can. The concern I have for college football, and I wrote about this at CrescentCitySports.com, was a couple of things. One, you have so many chefs involved with the individual conferences, the individual universities, the NCAA, the college football playoff, the bowls. It's really hard to get a coherent and consistent plan. And then the other thing is when universities shut down on a limited basis or completely and go online for the student body at large, it's difficult to say you're opening up the campus for an extracurricular activity for a limited number of students so they can play football. I think that's going to be a tricky situation if, in fact, a lot of schools decide to go to mostly or completely online courses, and we've already seen some announce that.
Oh, I'm definitely a believer that if you don't have school in session, you don't play sports. And I'm a sports guy, and I want to see sports, and I want to see sports badly, as I'm sure you do. And we saw Jefferson Parish Public School System announcing today that they're going to go back to in-school fully from K through 5, and that's because of the lack of risk to young people by and large, but that they're going to do a hybrid situation from 6th grade through 12th grade, which includes being in person in school at least 2 days a week and being online the rest of the time. Under those auspices, talking about high school, yes, you could play sports if, in fact, it was safe enough, because you do have some in-school participation. So, but I do think that you have to have in-school participation if you're going to have athletics.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it is probably easier for the high schools in that sense than it might be for the colleges, especially some of the more affluent colleges, because there are a variety of issues here, including access to laptops and online capability for individual students. But, the younger people seem to be less affected by this, so I think you can gradually open up with a little more of a confidence about the safety. But it seems like the universities are much quicker to go to an online operation, at least in part, and that's what complicates it for the college football season. But hopefully we can have some semblance of a season, but I'm not real confident at this point.
We saw today that California high school decided to push football back to the spring. Some people want to read into that, and I wouldn't read a lot into that because it's a different state and a different situation. Each one is individual. I've commended the LHSA because they have left the door open, and what they've simply done is kick the can down the road as long as they can to allow for this thing to play itself out, to give themselves a chance. And in the end, I think they'll make the right decision, whether it's to delay the season by 2 weeks, by a month, or if worse comes to worse, the last resort to push it back to the spring.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Eddie Bonine and the LHSAA have done a very good job of not only taking it one step at a time and being patient and not rushing to judgment either way. I think they've done a pretty good job of communicating their process and their position throughout this whole process. So I think they've done a good job. I do think that Georgia came out with a plan today. I haven't seen all the details, but they look like they're going to go ahead and try and have a fall football season of some sort, though I don't know the details.
And then with regard to the NFL, today the league and the players reached agreement on the whole testing aspect of the safety protocol after they were, I don't want to use the word bickering, but a lot of players got online yesterday and started really laying it out as to what they wanted to do and what they didn't want to do and what they thought the league had to do. So it looks like, just based on some of the reports, that if the positive test rate is below 5%, the league would scale back testing to every other day from every day. If the positive test rate is not below 5%, they'll continue with the daily to be testing on a regular basis, and understandable. And then also the league offered the Players Association to play no preseason games this summer. That, according to Adam Schefter of ESPN. The players have been pushing for that while the owners had held out for 2 preseason games. This doesn't come as a surprise, and frankly, I think a lot of people will kind of like the fact that there's no preseason games, or what I like to call exhibition games, or even scrimmages.
Yeah, there's been a big push for years to at least cut back on them, if not eliminate them, and I think this gives everyone an opportunity to see how it works with either just 2 games or it looks like now probably none. And I think we may have seen the last NFL season with 4 weeks of preseason games last year. That may never happen again. But what happened today, I think, is significant, because I think what's happened over the last few days is the NFL took the bull by the horns when they leaked that memo on Friday saying that we are teams have to report, and everybody's going to be in camp by the 28th. The Chiefs and the Texans reported today. Rookies can report tomorrow. And they were sending a message to the fans, we're back. And I think they caught the players back on their heels, because the players were like, wait a minute, we still have a lot of stuff to work out here. And that's why they had that organized effort on social media yesterday to respond. And fortunately, instead of digging their heels in, both sides came together today, came to an agreement on testing, and the Players Association said that that was one of the most significant things left to be resolved. So I think the fact that after a little bit of posturing for a couple of days, they came together and had a significant agreement today, I think is very encouraging.
I agree, and I like what I see. A couple of minutes left with Les East of CrescentCitySports.com, which, of course, leads us to the 2020 Saints. By all accounts, their prospectus is good, and it of course should be based upon the roster that they have. The question marks for me are obvious. The relative health of their linebacking core and the progression of a guy like Marcus Davenport and a guy like Marcus Williams. 2 Marcuses, to me, I think are key components of this football team as to whether they reach that elite status. Of course, you want to have good health. Kamara needs to be healthy. Sanders is a huge upgrade. You probably got another tight end that can really contribute. Your offensive line likely got better. Certainly on a long-term basis it did. So there's a lot to like here. You got a Pro Bowl return man. You got 2 excellent kickers. You still got a very good quarterback. You've got, a defensive line that has, again, depends on health, right? If Davenport's healthy, if Rankins is healthy, and how he can play. So to me, the questions on this team still all reside on defense.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one question mark on offense, and I don't think it's significant, but you touched on the long-term upgrade on the offensive line. The only question would be whether there would be any sort of short-term bump in the road. You have a second-year player, and now your rookie number 1 draft choice in Cesar Ruiz, starting on the interior. So even though Eric McCoy had a good rookie year, you're still going with a lot of youth there on the interior of the line. It looks like that should be solid. It's just a question of whether there are any growing pains there. But you're right about the defense, especially the health of Davenport and Rankins. I think you hit on a key player there in Marcus Williams, who might not be back next season if he doesn't have a good season this season. One thing I think the Saints do have going for them, because no matter how this plays out, this season is going to be played under unusual circumstances. And we have seen time and again with Sean Payton and his staff how they are able to handle being displaced for a storm on occasion, playing all kinds of weeknights, short weeks, long weeks, traveling abroad. They seem to be very sensible and very smart in how they go about handling unusual circumstances, and the best organizations tend to handle those things the best. So I think the Saints' track record in handling abnormal circumstances could serve them well in what's going to be a very abnormal season.
And finally, the Pelicans. Of course, none of us knows the status of Zion Williamson as to when he might return. Scrimmages will be starting in 2 days. First game is in 10 days. The hope is that he'll be back prior to then, but we don't know. My feeling all along was, at full force, they were absolutely going to make the top 9 and at least get to the play-in spot. That becomes problematic, and none of us really knows what his situation is.
No, we don't, and I would agree with you that they have a very good chance of at least getting to the 9th spot and having a chance to play into the traditional 8 playoff spots. But that changes if he's not around. He was playing exceptionally well when the season was suspended. It looks like he's gotten in excellent shape during the break. His teammates say his outside shot is much better. And, he was really such a big part of the team that they're going to have him for most, if not all of those 8 games if they're going to make a serious push. And but if they can somehow recapture where they were on March 11th when the plug was pulled, they have a good chance because they were starting to peak at the right time. And I think if the season had gone on uninterrupted, they would have made a strong push under normal circumstances.
Follow him on Twitter at Les_East. Of course, read his fine work at CrescentCitySports.com. Les, great having you with us tonight. Glad to know you're well. Hopefully we'll be seeing each other in person soon, and hopefully we'll be seeing some kind of game sometime soon, right?
I couldn't agree more. I'm getting a little bit of cabin fever.
All right, buddy. Stay safe. Stay well. See you soon. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Ken.
All right.